A group of men set out on a mission to explore an uninhabited island on the Pacific Ocean. But circumstances on the mythical island give them the surprises of their life, essentially creating a man versus nature scenario. What happens next? Let's find out in this movie recap. Hello everyone, welcome to Monster Recall. In today's video, we will be going through the 2017 action monster film, Kong: Skull Island. It's time to recall. Let's get started. Turn on subtitles and spoilers ahead. In the year 1944, somewhere over the South Pacific, Lieutenant Hank Marlowe's plane crashes out of nowhere, forcing him to land with his parachute on an island. Soon after this, another soldier called Gunpei Ikari lands close to the lieutenant. Considering him a threat to himself, Marlowe draws his gun on Ikari and shoots. Fortunately for Ikari, he misses. Thereafter, Ikari also takes out his gun, finds the right opportunity, and begins chasing after Marlowe. They run into a forest and begin fighting as they go by a cliff. Not long after, Ikari was able to nearly impale Marlowe with his sword, but Marlowe managed to pull it away. Finally, Ikari is able to pin Marlowe on the ground and almost kills him until a gigantic ape hand appears out of nowhere. The two men then see the ape rise above them. The scene then shifts to the year 1973, showing a Washington, D.C. government building. There, government officials Bill Randa and geologist Houston Brooks arrive to meet with Senator Willis. The aim is to receive funding for an expedition to a recently discovered location called Skull Island. Senator Willis does not appear very keen on the idea, but Randa is able to convince him into relenting with his words. Before leaving, Randa also tells Willis that he would like a military escort to the mentioned island as well. The Sky Devil Squadron is then shown gathered up on their last day before they can finally go home. Led by Colonel Preston Packard, they include Captain Earl Cole, Slivko, Rules, Glenn Mills, and Jack Chapman, who's Packard's right-hand man. Packard receives the call for the expedition and gladly accepts the job. Meanwhile, Randa and Brooks go to a bar, where they find a former British Special Air Service captain named James Conrad. Conrad is also confronted by two bar patrons who believe he cheated in a game of pool, but he easily subdues the men, showing his mental sharpness. Randa is immediately impressed, telling Brooks they've found their guide. He is approached by the two to become the tracker for the mission. Conrad sits with Randa and Brooks to hear their plan. When he hears their offer, he demands more money and points out that there's a good chance that the trip will get them killed, for reasons involving severe weather conditions or predatory creatures. In the next scene, the inside of a darkroom is shown, where an anti-war photographer, Mason Weaver, is developing some photos she took of the conflict in Vietnam. She gets a call to join the expedition, and she arrives at the base to meet with Packard and his men, plus a team of scientists from the company Landsat, including Brooks' fellow geologist San Lin and Landsat employees Victor Neves and Steve. Weaver also appears to have serious reservations about the mission, as she thinks that the military is planning something bad. She also joins them, but only intends to expose the mission's reality by taking secret photographs. So Brooks goes over the mission and what they hope to find on Skull Island. The team is then shown sailing into the ocean, before taking choppers to the island. Another problem was that they had to pass through clouds that produced hurricane-like conditions. Against tough luck, the team is able to find a high-pressure pocket that they believe will be a relatively safer route. After a severely turbulent ride through the storm, the choppers begin flying across the area. This is when suspicious Weaver is shown taking some pictures while the soldiers begin dropping seismic charges into the ground, setting off multiple explosions one after the other. Almost immediately, a tree is thrown through one of the choppers, sending it crashing to the ground. This is when the team actually sees Kong towering right over them. He sends another tree through a chopper before grabbing a few more and smashing them into the ground, creating absolute chaos in the area. The surviving team members are shown to be completely separated once they hit the ground. It is amidst the flames burning from the remains of the choppers that Packard stares right up at Kong, who also looks down back at him. Packard grows suspicious and agitated, and is later shown confronting Randa at gunpoint, as he demands to know what really brought them there. At gunpoint, Randa admits that he had known about the existence of monsters like Kong for a while, and he's seeking proof for his organization, Monarch. All the team members are able to agree on a plan, and decide to split themselves into two groups. Conrad, Weaver, Brooks, Lynn, Slivko, and Neves are grouped together, while Randa, Packard, Mills, Cole, and other soldiers set out to look for Chapman. Chapman was the only person who had been equipped with enough ammunition that Packard intended to use against Kong, so finding him became important. As the soldiers walk through a bamboo forest, one soldier suddenly stops. A few seconds later, it's shown that a bamboo tree has impaled him right through the mouth. Above them is an absolutely gigantic spider that also starts attacking them with its full might. Mills is also pulled up by the webbing, but the rest of the soldiers immediately start cutting the spider's legs off. Mills is able to cut himself loose, and Packard then finally shoots the spider to death. The next scene shows Chapman all by himself near a river. This is where he also sees Kong walking through the river to tend to a wound he sustained from the chopper's gunfire. Kong is also shown drinking from the river and then finding an absolutely gigantic octopus, the same size of the spider the team had just fought. Kong comfortably tangles with it, fighting off its tentacles before he starts to eat it. He then drags the octopus carcass away. Soon, Conrad's group is also cornered by a tribe of natives. As the team desperately tries to defend themselves, an older Marlowe comes outside. He assures both groups that they're not harmful to each other, and then invites the group past the wall. Marlowe explains to the group that he's been there for the last 28 years, and has learned a lot about the natives and the island itself. It's also revealed that the mighty Kong is like a god to them, as he's been protecting them from the creatures that dwell beneath the earth and have been killing off the natives for centuries. Kong protects the natives, as well as its own family. This is when Marlowe also calls them skull crawlers. It's revealed that they stayed underground until the explosions from the seismic charges woke them up. If anything were to happen to Kong, the skull crawlers would dominate the island. However, Kong reigned until the moment that would happen. He also suggests that the skull crawlers that have come to the surface are just juveniles. That's when he says that much larger ones also exist beneath the earth. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Chapman, who isn't able to be found by any of his peers till this point. Still alone, Chapman walks through the forest and sits on a log. Unfortunately, the log turns out to be a giant insect. Incredibly surprised, Chapman shoots at it, but the creature does not retaliate. As the creature is shown on its way, the scene takes a dramatic shift, as Chapman is immediately killed by a skull crawler. After this, it was along their way that Weaver saw a huge water buffalo stuck under a crashed chopper. She tries lifting it up to free the buffalo. However, this only results in Kong showing up at the scene and pulling the chopper off. After this move, Kong stares down at Weaver briefly, and then goes on his way. Surprised more than ever, she appears more awed by him than terrified. The following scene shows Conrad telling Marlowe that they plan to make it to their rendezvous point on the north side of the island within 3 days. The time limit is set, keeping in mind the idea that they may be rescued. To this, Marlowe responds by saying that it cannot be done in 3 days on foot, so he agrees to guide them the right way. He bids the natives farewell and takes the crew on a boat. Shortly after riding away, Neves is snatched up by carnivorous birds and is torn apart mid-air. Following the incident, Marlowe is shown in the next scene leading the group into the Forbidden Zone. The Forbidden Zone is essentially the place that was used as a former battleground between Kong's ancestors and the Skullcrawlers. The absolute enormous and terrifying remains of Kong's family lie among the field. As the remains were being shown, a Skullcrawler appeared before them, forcing the group to hide. To everyone's terror, the Skullcrawler then spits out Chapman's skull and dog tags, which Conrad notices, confirming the death of their partner. Randa is then shown continuing to take pictures. He too is then snatched up and eaten by a Skullcrawler. Another beast shows up and starts to attack and pull victims in with its tongue. Meanwhile, the remaining groups continue their battle with the Skullcrawlers, as a wave of the carnivorous birds also begin their encounter with the survivors. Marlowe takes out the sword that belonged to Ikari and slashes through several of the birds before handing it over to Conrad. Weaver kills one by tossing a lighter into a hole that produces fumes, which is ignited and sets the creature on fire. It was after the fight that the remaining survivors regrouped. However, Packard is still set on looking for Chapman. Conrad shows Packard Chapman's dog tags to confirm his demise. Still, Packard says that they should continue to look for Chapman's ammunition stash so that they can kill Kong. In other words, Packard is the only one that appears hell-bent on revenge for the deaths of his men, despite the objections of Marlowe, Conrad, and Weaver, who are advising him against the heroic idea. It was the same night that Packard decided to gather all the explosives and lay a trap for Kong. Meanwhile, Conrad and Weaver also encounter the beast, but Weaver approaches him cautiously. She places her hand on his face and notices that he's actually quite gentle. However, Packard lures Kong toward him and ignites the fuel along the water, singeing and burning Kong's fur. However, Kong stamps on Steve in rage and kills another man in the chaos before collapsing. This is when Packard gets ready to set off some explosives, but Conrad and Weaver are shown trying to stop him. They convinced the other soldiers that Kong was a necessity for them if they intended to keep the skullcrawlers away. Hearing this, the soldiers turn on Packard, who remains defiant. Just then, the biggest skullcrawler bursts out of the ground, forcing the group to run. Packard, however, stays behind to detonate the explosives, but Kong crushes him under his fist. The survivors then head toward the shore as the main skullcrawler pursues them. Cole stays behind to sacrifice himself with the explosive devices he has strapped to his body. However, the monster tail whips Cole into a wall and he blows up anyway. The skullcrawler heads toward the group until Kong returns and smashes into the beast. Weaver takes a flare gun and hits the skullcrawler in the face with it. Kong grabs the skullcrawler and hurls him into the wall, accidentally knocking Weaver into the river. Kong uses the ship's propeller attached to a length of anchor chain to wound the beast, finally slashing it in the throat. The beast isn't dead and attacks again. Kong pulls Weaver out of the river and still fights the skullcrawler with one arm. He rams his fist down the monster's throat and pulls out its guts. Kong then places Weaver down next to Conrad before leaving. Shortly after, the survivors depart on the boat, and 3 choppers show up to get them. In the distance, Kong keeps a lookout to continue protecting his territory. He pounds his fists and lets out a roar. As the credits begin, we see video footage of Marlowe finally returning home to Chicago, where he sees his wife again and finally meets his adult son. He then sits down to watch a Cubs game with a hot dog and a beer. After the credits, Conrad and Weaver are being held in an interrogation room by Monarch. Entering the room are Brooks and Lynn, who tell the two that Kong was never the only monster out there, and that this world did not always belong to humankind. Brooks pulls out some files, including a map of Tokyo, before putting on a slideshow. The slides show another crew coming across cave drawings of other monsters: Mothra, King Ghidorah, Rodan, and Godzilla himself. The last thing we hear is the combined roars of Kong and Godzilla. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get new movie recaps.